Let me follow up with Anita, kind of a two-part follow-up. Do you agree with Judy that 23,000 is the right number, or not? Do you have any other opinions on that? And then, assuming it is the correct number, isn't it reasonable to use all the tools available in order to achieve that target number?
Thank you for the question. Let me say, first of all, that I am not in a position to say whether that is the right number. Mark described all of us up here as experts on this, and I actually think that it might be helpful just to give a little bit of context to why I'm here speaking on behalf of this campaign and what my background is. I am here because I'm a Maine resident. I've lived here 15 years. I came here as a teenager and was so impressed with this state, with the beauty of the state, with its natural and open lands, that I ultimately find myself living here by choice, and have lived here for the last 15 years. I've hiked in Baxter. I've seen the black bears. And I actually really respect this state. This is a state that had the first animal protection law in the country back in the 1800s. This is the first state that had an elected official who was interested in animal welfare and who advocated for animal welfare and who worked for animal welfare. And that was that was our governor, the state governor, Percival Baxter. So the values of this state are ones that I identify with. So when I found out about these practices of how black bears in Maine are being killed, those practices particularly being baiting, hounding, and leg hold trapping, I was appalled. And I recognized it not only as not my value, but these are not the values of this state. And so I became involved with Mainers for Fair Bear Hunting and have been talking to people across the state in the signature gathering part of this, and know that many, many, many people share the view, once they learn about this, that this is not the value of the state, it's not their value, and that this is the opportunity for Mainers to bring these to a halt. So that doesn't make me an expert. I don't purport to be an expert on what the right number should be. But one doesn't have to be an expert to recognize that if these practices have been in place as long as they have, and this population is going up at the rate that it isn't working, and that it's time to stop and figure out what is different here, what is going on here in the state. And these practices are contributing to the problem, as I know we'll be discussing later.
I know it was a great opening question, and I think both Daryl and James want to get involved in this. So let me bring Daryl into the discussion first.
Sure. I certainly know that the department does a good job of doing their best to estimate bear populations. It's very difficult. They use 3 relatively small study areas and they extrapolate from that, and I think I can agree that we likely have 30 or 31,000 bears. I don't agree on the other part of it. Obviously, I do my homework, I read a lot, and I know beyond a shadow of a doubt that feeding bears, baiting bears, the amount of food that we are presenting to them every fall at a time of year when they need the most calories is actually contributing to the population rise. And we'll go into that farther as we move along.
James?
Yeah, I think it's really important that the audience, both here tonight and our listening audience, understand the fact that Judy brought up a very important point, and that is the fact that the Maine Department of Inland Fisheries and Wildlife has a process by which the public can go through every year, or every 15 years, I should say, in order to help determine our management objectives for Maine black bears. I myself am not a biologist, and I don't pretend to be, but I think it's really important that, and I appreciate Anita's care for the state, love of the state, but the bottom line is the public has the ability to provide input into that process and into the management objectives, and that process is set to take place again next year in 2015, and the bottom line is, instead of going through that process with the rest of the public, we're faced with a multi-million-dollar referendum from an organization, frankly, that's based out of Washington, D.C., and fully funding almost the entire campaign of the proponents.
All right, we're back to the audience. Sir, please tell us who you are, where you live, and what is your question?
My name is Mike Delcamp. I live in Portland, Maine, and Mark, as I understand it, biologists are actually calling the shots on our main policy procedures with regard to the control of the population of the bear, as well as the deer and other aspects of our wildlife in the state of Maine. But what I have a question for the people who are proponents on the panel is when we have the deer population being hounded by, say, animals that are dogs that are loose and naturally packing together and then chasing and killing these deer in winter in the deep snow, most people recognize that as deplorable and not a good thing to have happen, including our game wardens, I would imagine. But why is it different when we have either hunters or contractors or wardens or whoever using bear hunting dog packs to chase and to presumably kill bear? I just don't understand that as a citizen of the state of Maine. And if we have a public referendum that says this is not correct procedure or policy, I'm sure that the biologists, who are creative, intelligent people, presumably, they'll be able to come up with another way to control the population. Furthermore, the population is naturally controlled by, say, the conditions, and also these creatures are territorial to begin with, so there are natural limits on population of bear.
All right, well, let me start off with James. So, great question. Dogs bad for deer, good for bears. Is that a reasonable supposition that he made?
It's not when it comes to this case. And I think it's really important for the public to understand that we don't have the opportunity for a line item veto in this case. We don't have the opportunity to select which methods we think are okay and which aren't. The bottom line is that the department, and based on their 40 years of scientific research, and a nationally recognized program, frankly, are telling us that they need all three methods in order to be able to control Maine's bear population. It doesn't work if you take one of those methods away. We're not going to be able to meet our harvest objectives, and we know that will result in increased human bear conflicts, not just in rural Maine, but in southern Maine as well. We saw that over the course of last year. We've seen bears outside of the Kennebunk School. We've seen bears in the middle of Topsom, in Litchfield, and the list goes on and on. Bear-human interactions are on the rise across the country, and I think we ought to take advantage of the fact that we have a nationally recognized program with one of the healthiest bear populations in the country and the lowest number of nuisance complaints.
Daryl, do you agree with James?
I would suggest that feeding bears human food is leading to nuisance complaints. Now, I'm going to preface that with a lot of the baiting is done in northern Maine, where there's a much lower population. But baiting is done across the state of Maine. I have 2 bait sites within 500 yards of my house. I'm in coastal northern Maine. And I do believe that anthropogenic food habituates bears to human areas, human food, human smells, if the baiting is done in those areas. So I think across the country we do see nuisance complaints. I think if the referendum passes, we'll see nuisance complaints. If the referendum doesn't pass, we'll see nuisance complaints.
We're only about 15 minutes in tonight's town hall, and we've had some great questions. But our viewers at home have been weighing in for weeks. So before we go to our social media desk, I want to check in with one more viewer here. Sir, please tell me who you are, where do you live, and what is your question?
My name is Wally Staples. I live in Woolwich, Maine, and I have been a guide for over 40 years. I've worked with bear one-on-ones. My question to the panel is, I read your article here. The state of New Jersey, for instance, tried to stop all baiting, all hunting, to a complete halt. They found out within 5 years that they had to reopen it. Tell me, isn't the same thing going to happen in the state of Maine? In this article that I read right here, that you had 600 complaints already this year. Imagine what it'll be if you stop hunting.
600 complaints about what?
Bear complaints where they have come into
nuisance, human interaction?
Nuisance, okay. Human action, and they have been a very dangerous situation where they have not only eaten moose, they have taken small deer, and they have actually come into territory, into places and beat on the doors of camps. This is facts.
Well, let me follow up with Anita. Now, certainly one bear-human interaction is one too many. Having said that, are we concerned? Should we be concerned? Is there an epidemic of sorts? Are we taking the right steps in order to decrease that human interaction that certainly poses a danger to humans?
In fact, we are doing just the opposite in this state in terms of taking steps to decrease human interactions with bears. And the main source of that is the baiting of bears. An inconsistency was raised just a minute ago why we tolerate bears chasing or find it inappropriate that bears are chasing deer, and yet we allow them to chase bears. That's not the only inconsistency here. In Maine, the baiting of bears goes on for a month before the season opens. No other state has a month of baiting before the season opens. And then when the season opens, the bears that have been habituated to come to the bait sites and eat food with abandon find themselves being shot while their heads are in a barrel of bait. Not all the bears get shot. The ones that don't get shot, however, have been habituated to be eating this food. Bear biologists across the country recognize that bears being given food, having access to human food, become nuisance bears. And this is where you don't have to be an expert. This is such common sense. We've been told all of our lives, don't feed the bears. Why in this situation is an exception made? We don't bait our deer, we don't bait our moose. Why, with the largest predator in the state, do we allow baiting to take place and create bears that are not only habituated to the bait sites, the thousands of bait sites where there is 7 million pounds of bait? We tolerate that, and then these bears become accustomed to it. They have very sensitive smell, and they're fully prepared to be seeking food wherever it is. They become more comfortable around human scent, and they start going into residential areas because they're accustomed to being fed food and looking for food.
But before I follow up with Judy, I just want to make certain, I want to clarify, though, you did mention that the bears are shot going for the food. That is the intention, though, of bear hunting, correct? Is to shoot the bears whether they're being fed or with baited or not, correct?
That is absolutely the intention.
Okay.
And of course, the difference is whether there is fairness involved in it, if we're going to be shooting bears, whether it is fair, and whether it is necessary for it to be done that way. If it's going to be done in a way that is so unfair, we really should be examining the necessity of doing it. And here, it's not only creating bears that are habituated to human food, it is creating more bears, because it is widely accepted that the more food that bears eat, the more productive the females are and the greater is the survivability of the cubs. More bears and nuisance bears.
I want to bring Judy back to the discussion.
So there's a lot of things that we covered here. So it's going to take me a couple minutes to get through them. But I want to start off with the New Jersey example, and I want to clarify something. The state of New Jersey did not allow hunting of bears for almost 40 years. So there was no hunting, there was no baiting, nothing like that. Their nuisance complaints were out of control. In the 2008 alone, the state of New Jersey had 100 bears enter homes with people in them. So that's not a bear getting into your camp, that's not a bear getting into your garage. That's you come downstairs and there's a bear in your refrigerator. Okay, so the nuisance complaints level in New Jersey were out of control, skyrocketing. Bear population was growing. Keep in mind, the state of New Jersey has only about 3,000 bears. We have close to over 30,000. So in 2009, I think, the state of New Jersey reinstated bear hunting. They now hunt bears, and every year since they started hunting bears in the state of New Jersey, their nuisance complaints have come down. So there's a couple other issues that were brought up here. That's just sort of the short story about New Jersey. We also talked about why do we allow certain practices for bears but not for deer and moose. And so there's a couple things there, and this is our job as wildlife biologists, as managers. We have tools that we use for different species. All the same rules don't apply. Different animals live in different habitats. So we use the tools that are appropriate for the particular species. And moose and deer are a great example. And we don't allow you to bait for moose and deer, and with good reason. For every bear in the state of Maine, we have approximately 8 white-tailed deer. Okay, so deer also occupy a different habitat. They're much more likely to come into hardwood, open areas. Bears occupy dense forest. They live in a different habitat by and large. So we have different tools. We also have in the state of Maine close to 200,000 people that participate in our white-tailed deer hunt. In the state of Maine, we have less than 11,000 people that hunt bear. And our success rate for people who hunt bear, on average, is 25% or less. Bear hunting is very difficult, even with all these tools. Baiting is by far our most successful method. It's the most effective tool we have to control the population. Now, if we look at our moose population, in Maine, our bear season is approximately 14 months. It's the longest season of any of our big game species because they're the hardest to hunt. So if we look at moose, which you're right, Anita, we don't allow baiting, we have a 6-day season. And our hunters are successful on average 72 to 78% of the time. So that's 72 out of every 100 people are successful hunting moose. So we use the tools that are appropriate for this species. And then so we also talked about nuisance complaints and baiting increasing nuisance complaints. And so if we follow that logic, which does seem logical on the surface, if we follow that, we would expect states that don't allow baiting at all to have relatively few to no nuisance complaints. In fact, it's the opposite. States that don't allow baiting actually have a higher nuisance rate than we have here in Maine. The same thing goes with our productivity levels, and we've got 40 years of data. Our biologists, I don't think the people of Maine realize this, but our biologists have been monitoring black bears longer than anybody in this country. We have the best bear biologists in North America. Randy Cross and Jen Vachon combined have over 45 years managing your black bears right here in Maine. So we have a really good handle on our population, and sort of lost my train of thought there.
Why don't I take that moment, and I'll bring Daryl in discussion for a moment. He wants to join this, and then I'm going to have to check with our viewers at home because they've got a lot of great questions as well. But Daryl, if I can get a brief comment from you on this.
I want to comment on New Jersey. New Jersey has 1,120 people per square mile. Maine has 43. It is a completely disingenuous comparison to compare one to the other. If they have 3,000 bears and we have 30,000 bears, we have more than less than 10 times the people density. We actually have about 20 times, 30 times the people density that that New Jersey has. So it's it's apples and oranges.
We could also look at the state of Massachusetts. The state of Massachusetts has not ever allowed baiting. In the 20 years since in the past 20 years, the bear population in the state of Massachusetts has grown 700%. They've never allowed baiting. They have a higher nuisance complaint than we have. In pre-1993 or so, the vast majority of the bears in the state of Massachusetts were in western Massachusetts. And in my discussions with the biologist at Massachusetts, they now have black bears in the suburbs of downtown Boston. And they have no tools to control that. If we lose our methods, we will have no opportunity to control the bear population. And that's why the department, our mandate is to protect wildlife. You know, that's what we do. We are wildlife biologists. We have dedicated our whole lives to protecting wildlife. And that's our job.